of COVID-19 in Canada. We're very pleased to have a wonderful panel of speakers with us here today to share their experiences over the last year. And I wanted to mention that part of the idea behind this event was to mark the over 1 year that we have all spent coping with the global pandemic and to think through some of what that has meant to communities here in Canada, particularly the Tibetan community, of which we're pleased to have several wonderful members with us here today. My name is Sarah Schneiderman, and together with Ratna Shrestha, Tsering Shakya, Catherine Hacker, Dagmar Schwerk, Elsie Lewison, and Mark Turin, I'm one of the members of the UBC Himalaya Program Steering Committee. Since this event is being recorded, I'd like to state today's date. It's Tuesday, March 30th, 2021, and I'm speaking to you from my home on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people in what is now called Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I know that our participants and audience members are joining from various locations around Canada and perhaps around the world. So please do take a moment to think about the territory where you are, wherever that might be, its history and the history of those who have cared for it over time, as our theme today is care, in a sense, for each other and for the places and people in which we live. For those who are joining us for the first time, before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about what we do at the UBC Himalaya program, why we do it, and how we go about it. Our program draws upon faculty expertise, student engagement, and community partnerships to build an interdisciplinary hub for sharing knowledge about the Himalayan region. Since 2015, we have worked together to develop an intensive Nepali and Tibetan language and community engaged learning program, which is operated for 5 summers, and with Tibetan language classes continuing throughout the academic year. We also host a regular speaker and event series with scholars and community members from around the world. And we've worked to create a vision for an interdisciplinary network across UBC, the lower mainland of British Columbia, across Canada, and into neighboring Washington state for collaborative projects that focus around research, student experience, and community engagement. I mentioned a moment ago that one of our main activities is hosting community engaged language courses in both Nepali and Tibetan each summer. And these will be offered again this year in summer 2021 through UBC's Department of Asian Studies as online courses with the potential for some in-person community events, depending upon public health orders closer to that time. And I'm hoping that one of my colleagues can put in the chat for you the link to our website where you can find more information about those courses. They'll be offered between May 10th to 21st. It's a 2-week intensive course. So if anybody here or others that you know may be interested in learning Tibetan or Nepali this summer, please do have a look at the website. Although the formal deadline for non-UBC students is March 15th, we have learned that we can have some flexibility on that. So if you're still interested in applying, please don't be shy and do be in touch if you would like more information. Today is our last virtual event of the academic year, but we hope you'll join our mailing list if you're not on it already to get news about our plans for next year and into the future. And we'll see, we're hoping we might be able to return to in-person events, which we all enjoy, but if necessary, we'll be continuing with a series of online events in the coming academic year. In the UBC Himalaya program, our partnerships are our strengths, and we're very fortunate that many units across UBC's campus come together to make our activities and events possible. For today's event, I'd like to thank the Institute of Asian Research at UBC's School of Public Policy and Global Affairs, as well as the Department of Asian Studies for support. And I also want to thank our student work-learn assistant, Belinda Suen, who has done a huge amount of work behind the scenes to make today possible. Thank you, Belinda. Before I turn it over to my colleague, Professor Tsering Shakya, to introduce our speakers and moderate the session, let me just say a few words about the Zoom webinar format that we're using today, as it has a few specific features that might be worth noting. First of all, audience members cannot use microphones or video cameras during the presentation. Any messages that you send using chat will only be seen by hosts of the meeting, not the other attendees. So really the chat is only for technical issues in case you can't hear the speaker or you have any other challenges that you need help addressing. Most importantly, for question and answer, please use the Q&A button, which should be on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you're welcome to type in your question for any of the panelists during any part of our session today. We'll be collecting questions and our moderator will be raising them for further discussion at the end. You can submit questions anonymously if you prefer, but please do use clear and appropriate language. That's about it from me. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Professor Tsering Shakya, to introduce our speakers and get us started with today's event. Thank you. I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Welcome to UBC Himalaya's lecture series, and Teshit to everyone who's joining us online. UBC Himalaya Program is delighted to host this online meeting on Tibetan community impact of COVID in Tibetan communities in Canada. UBC had a long connection with Tibetan community in Canada and globally. The first international Tibetan refugee aid organization was set up in 1960 by two of UBC professors and students from UBC. And also the first group of foreign aid worker volunteers who went to work with the Tibetan settlements are UBC students from that. And so the two of the professors was the great Canadian intellectual George Woodcock and Professor John Conway from History Department set up the Tibetan Refugee Aid Society, which is today transformed into Trans-Himalayan Aid Society and which functions as an independent NGO doing aid and development works in all over the Himalayas. And UBC also has had the honor to be one of the first university to confer honorary doctorate to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And we had the opportunity to invite and host His Holiness at the Vancouver campus twice then. And we had to host it also come about then. So it is precisely 8 years since the global outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. And our experience have shown that pandemic has a disproportionate effect on racial and ethnic minority groups with high death rates among marginalized groups in North America. So we can guess the mechanism of this disparity and social determinants of the health situations. Underpinning this long-standing structural and societal factor that COVID-19 pandemic had exposed. Today we have 5 knowledgeable and who have been on the front line experience of how the Tibetan community responded and how it impacted the community in Canada. It is most likely that Canada today has the most largest number of Tibetans outside South Asia. But this I just want to mention, I just got a text message from a friend that a week ago in Vancouver, we lost one dear member of our community, Ray Yi, who has worked tirelessly in the campaign for the Tibetan community here, and particularly in supporting the resettlement of Tibetans from Arunachal Pradesh for the last 4 years. And Janet, Ray's wife and family just announced they have set up an educational fund to sponsor children from Nepal and from Himalayas. And I'm just going to paste the details. And the trust, the Trans-Himalayan Aid Society, just announced that the Ray's memorial, and they asked me just post that on the chat. So I'll post the link in the chat. So that's one, and it's a very sad memory for Sitogala and Seldon, who we worked closely with Ray, and to our condolence and the prayers to Ray's family. Now, what I want to do is I will introduce the 4 speakers all together and then invite them to present. Our first speaker is Dadoen, who is the current president of the Tibetan Women's Association of Ontario. In addition to her community work, she works full-time as a financial advisor at Scotiabank and is mother of 2 teenagers. Thank you for participating, Dadoen. And the second speaker is Tenzin Nawang Tekan, who's a program and operation director at Parkdale Community Legal Services and community-based legal clinic serving low-income residents in Toronto West End. My third speaker is from Vancouver, Nawang Seldon, who's a graduate from engineering from Indira Gandhi Institute of Technology in India and came to Canada 4 years ago through the Tibetan resettlement project. Currently, she works as a recreational aide and long-term care service for the elderly in New Westminster, British Columbia. Our final speaker, community speaker, is Indira, who was born and raised in Mussoorie, North India, and currently based in Toronto. He works at the Toronto Grace Health Center as manager of information system and telecommunication. He has worked for over 20 years with Tibetan North American diaspora. He currently serves as the president of Canadian Tibetan Association of Ontario and the Tibetan-Canadian Cultural Center. The idea for this came because I've been following the work of Tibetan Women's Association in Ontario and the Tibetan Cultural Center in Toronto on their social media, and I really was impressed with the tremendous work they did during the past year. So this made me think that it is maybe a good idea for us, the Tibetan community, to present our narrative of how this pandemic has impacted us. After the 4 speakers' presentation, I will ask our viewers and the participants to pose any questions you may have to our speakers, and I will invite them to answer. After the question and answer, I'm going to ask Dawa, who is a member of UBC Himalaya Program and also from UBC School of Social Work. And she teaches a course on culture, race, and social work practice. And she's also practicing a social worker to provide a reflection and summary of the presentation today. Thank you. So I'll ask Dadoen to be the first speaker.
Tashidele, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me the Tenzin Nawang and the UBC Himalayan program. Today, I want to talk about Tibetan women's response during the COVID-19 here in Toronto. Let me give you a quick glimpse of COVID-19 have affected in Ontario. On March 23rd, 2020, Ontario declared the emergency order, which resulted in closing down all the stores, and everybody was affected with that. So we witnessed like firsthand responder acted so bravely during the COVID-19. We felt like being like lots of Tibetans working in the healthcare and the hospital, being a mother and a woman, we should take an initiative. So I had a meeting with my Tibetan Women's Association. We have like executive member, 13 of us. We had a meeting back and forth, what we can do to the community. Now we're seniors are isolated, they're staying home. And then we decided, like I had this idea, like I heard about the shortage of masks and the PPE. And then we said, like, we should step up and do a cloth mask. Like, we can't even buy from the store. So what happened is we have 2 ladies who know how to do a stitching. One of our executive, 2 of our members, they know how to stitch it. So we approached them and they decided to volunteer work for us. And then we started doing all the masks, and even though the stores are closed, we have to get a donation from our community members asking for brand new bed sheets. And then we bought from Costco. That's how we gather all the materials. And then we decided to make cloth masks. And then we made about 3,000 cloth masks, first of all. And then later on, like most of the ladies who worked in the hospital, they were asking about the hat. And then we decided to make a hat too. And later on, we couldn't handle it. It was too much. And then we collaborated with Tibetan-Canadian Culture Center. So we decided to do it together. And then the Canadian Culture Center is doing the distribution of masks and hat until now. And not only the mask and hat, what we have done is through the COVID-19, like we have so many programs, so we did it especially to the youngers. We do yoga and meditation every weekend for our 3 generations that come together, and then we provide them a free healthy breakfast, and we do a women and gender equality and bystander workshop, and through COVID-19 public health talk with a Tibetan doctor as well as a English doctor. And we do also a youth mentor and mentee program. We did a collaboration with the Tibetan-Canadian Culture Center. And especially through the COVID-19, what we did is we did a kids ballet. Like kids are at home, they like schools are off. So what we did is we did a virtual ballet class for kids under 12 years, which was really successful. And we did in person during the lockdown was ease off, and we did it at the Canadian Culture Center. And when everything was shut down, so we're still doing virtually with the yoga and the kids ballet. And we do a free income tax for the low-income families. And the last one we do is we do every Wednesday. It's called we do a hugger. It's we encourage a Tibetan younger generation learn from the seniors. To keep our traditional down, wear Tibetan clothes, eat Tibetan food, and speak Tibetan on that special day. It's a huge gather, and every Wednesday during the summertime, we have Hugger dance Gorshe. It's called Gorshe. It's a group dance celebration. We do it at the Parkdale High School. It's at the park, and we have every Wednesday, we have about between 150 to 300 people coming together, and then we share information. We try to serve them tea and snacks, especially in everything in Tibetan way. That's what we're doing. And then I think that's about it. Because of the COVID-19 now, everybody is everyone is isolated, staying home. People are stressed. That's why we want them to keep it active. We want them to come together to feel more comfortable, share each other. And then we do mostly virtually at the moment. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tanla. So next speaker, I invite Nawang Seldon to have presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Firstly, can you hear? It's my voice is audible. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Tashi Dilek to all. Before I start, I would like to pay my. Just give me a sec. Sorry. This is I cannot see probably. Yeah. Before I start, I would like to pay my respect to late Mr. Ray Yi and his family, my deepest and most sincere condolence, and may his soul rest in peace. I'm Nawang Seldon. I came to Canada 4 years ago as a part of Tibetan resettlement project. First of all, I would like to thank the UBC Himalaya Program for inviting me to be a part of today's roundtable discussion on how current pandemic affected the Tibetan community in Canada and our response to it, particularly the Tibetan community in Vancouver. I will first discuss my personal experience as a frontline healthcare worker in Vancouver. Then I'll talk about some of the support that Tibetan Culture Society of British Columbia offered to our community. And finally, I'll talk about the response of our community member to the pandemic, particularly how young people and adults have overcome the challenges and created new hopes for the future. When the pandemic hit us, I was a part of a recreation team at my workplace. Because of the pandemic and subsequent precautionary restriction, a lot of my colleagues couldn't report to work at my working location. They used to work at more than one location because we were allowed to work at one location only. Because of that, we had a shortage of staff in all departments. Though I had the option to work in my department only. However, I agreed to fill in as a healthcare assistant also for the elderly citizen with my regular duty. This is because the older citizens are the most vulnerable section of the society to be affected by pandemic. And I knew they were in high need. My work hour increased to 12 hours a day from 8 hours a day. My work shift became random and it became too hectic to handle with my personal tasks. However, I was able to sail through all of it because I believe that in this tough time, we had to help each other in whatever way we can. I feel happy that I could give a small contribution to support the elderly in Vancouver. The Tibetan Culture Society of British Columbia has been instrumental in helping our community. I would like to express my deep gratitude to the executive member of Tibetan Culture Society of British Columbia for their tireless and constant assistance. This organization provided meals and essential items and helped the families claim emergency funding and EI. Most importantly, the Tibetan Culture Society helped our community to understand the changing government orders. There was continuous updates on do's and don'ts by the local authorities, and the Tibetan Culture Society member assist in explaining the new updates to the Tibetans. Many Tibetans were new to Canada. Many were still not well acquainted with the local laws and have difficulty understanding English. All the BC Tibetans are extremely thankful to them. And our community has faced many challenges, but we have creatively overcome these. When the current pandemic hit in early 2020, most of the Tibetan families with the children were complaining that they could not go to work since either of the parents had to stay with their children at home. It badly hit their income. Moreover, many were working in healthcare sector and they were in dilemma to go to work because if they don't, they had to lose their income. If they do, they felt as if they're putting their family's health at risk. Also, the Tibetan family faced difficulty due to the new learning system during the lockdown. The student couldn't go to school and all the schools started giving online lessons. I remember some of the Tibetan family having hard time getting familiarized with the computer as most of them were newly arrived Tibetan families and some of them never used a computer. They were clueless what was going on with their kids' school and their education. But gradually, with all the fears and doubt were clear as they all got the information regarding the new learning system and the use of the computer. Even there was some family who felt really happy as they got time to spend with their children and know how they are learning. I really personally connected with the young people to hear how they are doing with the pandemic changes. I found that most of them have somewhat very similar story to share. At first, the corona didn't really catch their attention. They felt terrible about the life being lost and the challenges people were having to live through, but they were not much concerned about their own safety since they were younger, healthier, and they had a stronger immune system to cope with the COVID-19. However, most of them were overwhelmed with the changes. On the one late night in April, they were notified by the news channel that school would be closed indefinitely, and they were shocked as more information started to flow in about the deaths and health risks to the older people, not only in Canada, but also in other parts of the world. The younger people started to feel more concerned about their older relatives and parents. Many of them kept thinking the worst. What if something happens to their parents or grandparents or friends? Despite these worries, all the youth mentioned that they were able to spend most of the time with their family. It was really nice to have everyone gather around the table and talking to each other. The internet also was a great source of joy for them. They had a lot of free times, got to explore a lot of things on their internet, and realized on the online platform to grow even bigger and the opportunities it would create in future. Now they don't look at the YouTube and Instagram just for the entertainment or sharing photos or videos anymore. They look at them as the alternative career path. Few of them even started making their own YouTube channel, vlogging, and some of them were talking about share market and Bitcoins. I was really, really surprised. And I should say that sometimes bigger disaster brings smaller opportunities. In addition to new forms of family connection and opportunities that youth experience, this pandemic has shown us that there is a shortage of healthcare workers, especially in care aid. Recently, in January 2021, BC government encouraged people who wanted to study healthcare assistant by waiving off their tuition fee. It encouraged a lot of Tibetan parents who are working in the housekeeping department to study and move to healthcare sector. For instance, there are about 10 new Tibetans who are studying healthcare assistant. And whatever happened has happened. As a community, we try to transform collective challenges into new opportunities. As we look towards the future, we also grown and seen some benefit despite the hardship. Thank you.
Thank you, Seldon. Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. And now I'll invite Tenzin Nawang to give a presentation.
Thank you, Gela, and thanks to the UBC Himalaya Program for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. So while I was preparing notes for the topic today, how the pandemic has affected the Tibetan community here in Toronto and how the community responded, I struggled a little. I won't lie, I struggled a lot in articulating a shared experience of the Tibetan community. No doubt this is partly due to my COVID-19 brain fog. I think we're all feeling it 1 year into the pandemic, but more so because, you know, Tibetans are like other groups. We're not a monolithic group. While it's true that many Tibetans in Toronto are frontline workers in the lines of sanitation, food supply chains, healthcare, home care, retail, and hospitality, our experiences vary greatly based on socioeconomic status and access to resources. We have studies confirming what many of us have known, that COVID-19 has exacerbated existing inequalities. And the Toronto Public Health data shows clearly that lowest income groups have had the highest rate of COVID-19 cases. I think it was in the range of like 500 cases per 100,000 people compared to the rate in the highest income group, which was around 160 cases per 100,000 people. Tibetans, we work in all sectors, right? We work in factories, making bread, chocolates, window frames, soaps and shampoos, packaging chicken. We work at the Ontario Food Terminal, the largest wholesale fruit and produce distribution center in Ontario, processing more than 2 billion pounds of food every year. We work at the Metro Center and large and small downtown hotels as janitorial and housekeeping staff. Some of us are unionized, others aren't. Some of us know our union's names, others don't. We work in hospitals, long-term care facilities, retirement homes as personal support workers, nurses, patient aides, orderlies, maintenance staff. We work in real estate. We're entrepreneurs, cooks, mechanics, doctors, professors, teachers, social workers, students. We rely on pensions. We rely on social assistance and disability benefits to make ends meet. So when thinking about how the pandemic impacted Tibetans in Toronto, I think of how Tibetan workers who are on Ontario's Sunshine List experience the pandemic differently than Tibetan workers who are undocumented and working cash jobs and without recourse to social assistance because of their immigration status. Even though the social assistance is not the greatest, in Toronto with increasing rents, it's not enough to live on. For those outside of Ontario who may not be familiar, the Sunshine List is a published list of public sector employees who earn salaries of over $100,000. That said, there are special challenges that Tibetans face. While Tibetans are not a homogeneous group, we have shared experiences based on our history and trajectory of migration and displacement. As a relatively new community, the single biggest hurdle that, in my experience, insofar as my personal experience is admissible as evidence here, is that of immigration status. And since before the pandemic, I'm used to getting calls from fellow Tibetans. Some I know from my work in the community. Others are strangers who have my cell phone numbers from others that I know. And most calls, if not all, have to do with immigration status or family separation or both. As Gainsering Shakila mentioned earlier, I work at a community legal clinic in Parkdale, and it's a neighborhood that has a sizable Tibetan community, and it's mostly concentrated in South Parkdale. A little bit about Parkdale, in case folks are not familiar. It's often referred to as the landing strip of Toronto, where migrants and refugees settle when they first arrive. There have been waves of newcomers from China, the Caribbean, the Central and South America, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka ever since, I think, the 60s and 70s. The Tibetan community is, a much newer community. We have called this neighborhood our home, I think, since probably the 90s, maybe earlier. Many have settled in the mid-rise apartment complexes that line Jameson Avenue along, there's this street between Lakeshore, between the lake and Queen Street West. And if you walk down Jameson Avenue, you'll see prayer flags from balconies. If you walk past Queen Supermarket, you'll hear Tibetan songs blaring on the speakers. If you're craving homemade atsamba, you can buy them at one of many grocery stores where they're sold in large Ziploc bags. Even buildings in Parkdale have Tibetan names. Ask any Tibetan in Parkdale and about where Tashidele building is. They'll point you to the apartment building on the northwest corner of King Street and Jameson Avenue. You're probably wondering how come the building is named Tashidele. The story goes that when Tibetans started to move into this building, the convenience store owner on the ground floor would greet all the Tibetans with Tashidele. And much to the joy of Tibetans, we take such delight in non-Tibetans speaking our language, so much so that Tibetans started calling the building itself Tashidele. And that's what we refer to the building as nowadays. If you've been fortunate enough to visit Toronto, I'm sure you've been to one of many Tibetan restaurants on Queen Street. I think there's 14, if not more. So while coming back to the topic at hand, there are many differences in how the pandemic impacted Tibetans, but there are similarities too. Most of us have cleared multiple hurdles put in our way by Canada's seemingly arbitrary immigration and refugee determination system. Some of us have had the misfortune of getting bad advice. We've had shoddy documents, or the bad luck to get assigned a decision maker notorious for rejecting 90% of refugee claims he comes across. Some years ago, I met a man who showed me a tattered Chinese government issued resident identity card. He told me he hid it in a sack of tsamba when he came from Tibet, when he made that journey. And he had heard that, you know, if you are planning to go to the US or Canada, you have to prove your identity, that it won't do to simply state that you're Tibetan for what is a refugee's worth. These days, I don't meet people in person. They call me to ask about their options. They tell me they were refused refugee status, that they are the only person in the family to be refused. The stories are all, you know, different. There were credibility issues. There's development of new case law in India regarding citizenship. There's no proof of their identity, refusals upon refusals, appeals upon appeals. Then there are those who call because they're waiting to be reunited with family members abroad, usually in India or Nepal, and years have gone by without any updates. When COVID-19 struck, immigration offices everywhere shut down. For most of 2020, there was very little activity on these already backlogged files and applications. And everyone I speak to says the same thing, that they feel stuck, incomplete, without your shugu, your status, there is no moving forward. When I speak to them, something that seems to resonate is when I tell them that they're not alone. As Tibetans, we've always had difficulty with our shugu and yigja, whether here in Canada or Nepal or India or even Tibet. Tibetans know how difficult it is not to know if you'll have secure status or if you'll ever see your family. And in a strange way, there is some consolation in the knowledge that your community knows and understands what you're going through. They've been through the same thing. And I witness on a daily basis the care and compassion shown by Tibetans to those who turn to them for support. Settlement and social workers in Parkdale, community and religious leaders, the numerous Tokpas and Kiduks and Chitsuks here in Toronto and outside in the GTA. Even though we're a relatively small and new community, we've certainly wasted no time in establishing very many successful associations and support groups. I'm a little bit in awe actually of how many organized groups there are for such a small community. I don't have a comprehensive list, but there's the TCC, TWAO, SFT, RTYC, Chishikangdu, CTC, Nguri Foundation, Porong Kidu, Pemako Kidu, TCB Alumni Association, Deme Kidu, Ex-Missouri, Tehor Kidu, TCPC. There's probably a lot more that I don't know the names of. The point is that there's an incredible amount of organizing for and by Tibetans in Ontario. Before the pandemics, these groups were active in organizing weekly and monthly events. Dadoen earlier spoke about the weekly Gorshe. That was amazing. And I can't wait until, you know, that's back after the pandemic. And it's through these groups that relationships of trust and mutual understanding that were nurtured, I think, long before the pandemic. They have been critical in blunting the sharp edges of COVID-19 on our community. And I'm so incredibly grateful for everyone, you know, the hardworking, creative, dedicated, community-minded individuals and Tsokpas, Kiduks, Chitsos, who are on the ground, ready to do what they could to lessen the impact of the pandemic. There are many in our community who face language barriers to accessing information and government services, who struggle with housing affordability, immigration issues, precarious work, mental health issues. Because of the concentration of Tibetans in Parkdale, there are many Tibetan-speaking staff working at social service agencies in the area who are well equipped to support people with a number of issues. And I'll end there. I think I'm out of time, so I'm sure we'll continue some of the conversations in the Q&A and chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tenzin. Great. I'll now invite Sirong Yala to give us his presentation on the response of the Tibetan Cultural Center in Toronto, in Ontario. Thank you, Sirong Yala.
First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Shakila, Belinda, and the entire UBC team, for putting this together and giving me an option to be part of this UBC Himalaya program. I think, what Tenzin Nawang Tekan spoke kind of sets the stage for my presentation. So, I have a PowerPoint I'm going to share with you. Okay. And, all the viewers out there, thank you for joining in as well. So, I'll talk from a community perspective, from an organization perspective, how we actually responded, during the COVID. And I know the speakers spoke about some of the challenges and, the issues and all of that we had. It's not only, one community, but the communities across, I think, had the same issue as well. So just a little background about our organization here. The Canadian Tibetan Association was founded way back in 1980. Tibetans, they came in the 70s, but it was in 1980 when our, Tibetans that came earlier on, they established the organization. And then in 2007, we bought, the Tibetan-Canadian Cultural Center, and it was established as a not-for-profit charity organization. And we're located right in the heart of, Etobicoke, or in Toronto, I should say, with a 2-acre land, 50,000 square foot. We transformed it into from a lighting factory when we first bought it, and I was involved with the whole purchase of the land. I was the vice president then, and we transformed a lighting factory into a more community usable space with a banquet hall, a prayer hall, office space, and meeting space. We serve about roughly between 9,000 to 10,000 Tibetans that live in Ontario. With various programs, and our main mandate is to preserve and promote our culture, traditions, and of course, meet the requirements of our youth, our seniors, and help newcomers as well. And we liaise between the Central Tibetan Administration and the Tibetan community here in Ontario through the Office of Tibet in Washington, D.C. So this is my my wonderful team, my board of directors, or we're like the executive team. 14 members. We're all volunteers, and then we have 3 staff that work some on a part-time basis, some are on a full-time basis, and we cover all the events, religious, the education piece, as well as we have someone looking at all the finances, and then of course a youth coordinator, and we try and cover all of similar to all of the organizations that are in the U.S. and other parts of Canada as well. So this is what, just to give you a little glimpse of what our center looks like. This is like our main hall. This is, our gymnasium. Since 2016, we raised the roof and we built a new gym along with, a new prayer hall. So I'll show you the prayer hall right now. It's a full gym, and we finished it in 2019, early 2020. Just before the pandemic, we actually inaugurated this. And here's a wonderful, the prayer hall. Pre-COVID, this is what it's like. We have thousands of Tibetans that actually come and congregate and get together with government, members of parliament, provincial parliament, all 3 levels, and it's quite a an occasion. This is our stage. We have some performers there. And then we have, of course, our youth, our kids that perform, that learn the language, at the same time with the opening of the gym. It's been incredible with a lot of youth coming in and attending a lot of our programs. So on March 11th, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus as a global pandemic. We all know that. And then, all of the governments around the world, and public, especially the public health institutions, they're looking at containing the virus. And there was disruption of social economic lives of the Canadians here, as well as the Tibetans here in Ontario. The way we interacted with people, how we learned, how we worked, everything changed. And these were tough times, challenging times. I'm sure you're all, aware of the early March days, and people were living in fear, anxiety. I remember there was at times that there was no one on the streets when you went out, and no one wants to even actually go into the grocery stores. The Tibetan community also had the same challenges. We didn't know how we would move forward, what vision, we had no vision of the pandemic, how long it would last, how quickly it would spread, who would get it, which parts of the society would get more affected than the others. And of course, so we had programs at the center which we wanted to continue as well. So our spiritual programs, the cultural programs, the language programs, and of course, one of the things that I was worried about is how do we sustain our monthly expenses, because we depended so much on donations and event revenue and rental fees. So, in such a crisis, I think it's, what we felt as an organization was that responding effectively to a crisis like this required us to be very timely. And then we had to gather all of the credible information and had to plan really well. So the first thing that we really did was we made sure that the priority, the safety was #1 priority of our community members. So we closed the gym the entire center on March the 16th. And except for, our office admin staff, he was the only one that was actually working during that time. So but at the same time, we wanted to make sure we kept, our engagement with our community members. We wanted to make sure that, we provided all the spiritual and the mental well-being, and we wanted to make sure that we reached out to all of the seniors, all age groups, like the seniors, the adults, as well as the youth. And then, of course, one of the things we really wanted to do was, since we had a large community and good volunteers, we wanted to make sure that we reached out, if possible, to, other communities as well. So the first thing that we did as an organization, we actually formed a COVID task force. And the task force, comprised of, we had two our learned monks, we had a Tibetan herbalist, Western Tibetan doctor with the Western medicine experience. We had 2 nurses, and of course my board. So we formed this task force, and any questions or any issues related to COVID, whether it was mental health, whether it's fear, anxiety, everything was, addressed to this hotline. And that's how we, started off. And then during the early April, our 2 monks, Geshe Ngawla and Kimbala, they recited mantras and prayers, which, we were asked to, recite from the Central Tibetan Administration to bring about, tranquility and, amongst all sentient beings around the world. So that was something that we had a live prayer session, and people through Facebook Live, they were able to, basically be part of it. So the other things that we did was we, as the Fed and the province were responding, we made sure that our community were well informed through our member of parliaments and the member of provincial parliaments related to what kind of, how the Fed was responding, and whether it was in terms of the SERB and all of those other programs they had. Similarly with the province related to, what were the precautions that we need to take in terms of, the coronavirus during that time. So those were some of the things that we did in the early days. So towards the end of April, this was something that we really tried out initially, and we, as we saw the need to reach out to other communities, we found that we had a lot of our community members that worked in hospitals, and then of course, the hospitals, there were all of these frontline staff that were really catering to people who were, who got the COVID and risking their lives. So it was a chance for us to give back to the community, and especially, following the principles of what His Holiness preaches all the time. So we said, we need to do this. So we partnered with Shangri-La Restaurant first, and that's when we provided about 150 meals through them to St. Joseph Hospital. And, we could see a big smile on the frontline staff, and it gave us a lot of, I think, satisfaction, especially, the work that we did. And then we continued that work, and over 20 plus organizations, the hospitals, healthcare centers, community housing shelters, and encampments, we went around, and we actually, we served around 50,000 meals from our community kitchen, and we served about 50,000 meals roughly from our partner, restaurants. And here are some pictures that really show the work. There's a lot of videos that we captured, but all of it is on the social media. So, and then here are some pictures of there were tents out there, encampments where we went to, and we served food as well. And this is a respite center, a city-owned respite center outdoors, which we served as well. So the other thing that we did was, the COVID-19, with COVID-19, Feed It Forward, an organization, they came forward. This is an organization that rescues food, and they, rather than it going into the landfill, they, cook the food and distribute it to anyone that needs, a day's meal. So we partnered with them. We had our volunteers work with them. They used our community kitchen, and we served around 12,000. So their model is a little bit different. They would cook the food, make it cold, freeze it, and then they would distribute it out. Compared to what we did in the past is basically we would make hot food and just serve it right on the same day. But this was something that we did around. So throughout the summer, we served around 12,000 meals. And then during the holiday season, around November, December, there were around 50,000 meals that were made, in our center and then distributed out. We also worked in helping kids, with and providing kids hampers. And as Dadoen mentioned from the TWA, they initiated this whole this mask making, this initiative. So mask and hats. So these are my heroes, So the way we actually did this was we used to look for cloth. Early on, it was very difficult to get cloth. When we got cloth, we couldn't get the elastic bands. I ordered from Amazon. It took about almost a month or two to get something. So anyhow, we managed, and then we made about 8,000, surgical, non-surgical hats and masks, about 17,000, and we're still doing this right now and distributing it. And the healthcare workers that are in hospitals, they really love the hats, especially, the ones that work in long-term care centers. And we always run out of hats all the time. So for our seniors, we made sure that we keep them engaged, through all of our mental health programs, spiritual programs, which we always, stream live. But at the same time, we made sure that, we provided hampers, food hampers, and we didn't just provide any kind of food, but we had Tibetan noodles in there. We had barley, which is our staple diet, and then oatmeal and something that, would be more culturally, viable and they would use. So we had volunteers, and the great thing is we had volunteers and youth that actually helped us distribute all of this to the elders. So the program worked really well. The community came together, and I think distributed about 500, these food hampers over 5 different, weeks. From a mental health perspective and from a spiritual perspective, we had a lot of our elders. So we relied on their parents to make sure that they were able to log on to the Facebook, and that was a challenge in the early days. And Geshe-la, our Champa Sringla, he was kind enough to offer for 45 days, 2 hours every evening. And I remember talking to some of the elders. They would look forward to sitting down and through an online event, sitting down and reciting these prayers. So from a wellness and mental health perspective, some of the other things that we did was we have a Tibetan traditional herbal center at the center. So our herbalist Amji Kerabla, he consulted with a lot of the COVID patients, and so far he's actually put COVID patients that were positive. And I just got this number not too long ago. Today 260 thus far. So he's directly spoken to them, and he's provided dietary advice. And we, as volunteers, we used to make momos, Tibetan dumplings, and then we provided fruits and dropped them off at their door, all these patients who were affected with COVID, and the whole family at times were affected, so they couldn't come out. We took all of that and made sure so it was a way to actually make them feel that we cared for them, right? And all of our religious events, we made sure that we hosted all of it through an online platform like Facebook or YouTube. So this is Igor Shea. It's something similar to what Dadoen just mentioned. They had it outside, we have it inside. We have an ongoing. So we had the line dancing every Wednesday for about 4 months, and we had roughly around over 100 people that used to participate in these events. So at home, the whole family, they would participate, and we would broadcast live. And this was a way to keep our community healthy, keep connected with our organization as well.
Srila, I just need to ask, we're running out of time.
Okay.
Can you?
Yeah, so I'll quickly wrap up. Yeah. So, we have a great youth committee. We had events, youth events. And what we did was we made sure that our youth actually teach the other youth. So all of the, teachers or individuals that were part of this were all youth. So we had philosophy classes, we had mental health classes. And then, of course, I won't go through this. And then during Lahakar, which is His Holiness's birthday last year, it was, a gratitude year as well. So we distributed about 1,000 vegetarian hot meals all across Ontario. And during September, what we basically had a little window where things opened up a little bit. So we gathered 50 kids. We got some grant, and then we had a week-long program for all of the kids during this. We took them to Central Island, had some programs at work. And this is one of the last things I want to talk about is, all across the world, the Tibetans, we were having elections for the president and the member of parliament which happened in January. And we were under lockdown, so the only option was to do it through, a drive-through, and which we really, were very successful in doing a drive-through elections. Right. So some of the ongoing initiatives that we're doing is with now the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccination, is out there. We're part of the engagement team here. We're a consortium member, and we're trying to see how we can actually roll it out, amongst our community. We're trying to be a potential vaccination site as well. And then, we're still delivering some of these programs. So overall, I would say, it wasn't easy, but it was very challenging. But at the same time, the community came together. We went through this, we fought it through. And of course, my team risked their lives along with the volunteers. And my hats off to my vice president, Sringla, who's the admin. They've been working day in, day out all throughout, the pandemic. So it's been a collective effort all throughout. And as far as from my perspective, I think we've responded really well. And thank you everyone for listening in.
Thank you, Srongala. Thank you for all the presenter for your wonderful presentation.
Sorry for the word.
Yeah, I'd like to now ask the audience if they have any questions to either they can type in the Q&A section, but I will now pass on to my colleague Dagmar, who will monitor the question and answer. We have a first written question. Do we need first any of the the UBC panelists have any questions? Because I don't think the host, we cannot type the questions into the Q&A section. Does any of the panelists or the UBC Himalaya Program members have any questions to our presenters?
Yes, I see one open question first in the Q&A chat from James. So if James, nice to see you here. So if you would like to ask in person, you can also, I will allow you to talk now as well, if that is an option.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, James.
Hi, sure. I just put the whole question there. First of all, thanks so much for organizing this event. It was great to hear from all the speakers today. I was just, as I was listening, I heard so much about different Tibetan community organizations, and I was just wondering, in a sense, how much during this time, you've also interacted with, other non-Tibetan organizations, and further beyond that, like due to COVID, I know I feel isolated in a lot of ways from different people and organizations and communities. So I'm just wondering if you as Tibetans or Tibetan Canadians feel the Tibetan community as a whole, or just yourselves feel a little more isolated from the other non-Tibetan communities in Canada, of which there are so many. So I'm just wondering if there's anything that could also be done to ameliorate that, if that is the case. And I'm thinking especially for newcomers, that I know people are still arriving in Canada, so it would be a very difficult time to come. And then, if you're interacting mostly with other Tibetans, that's great, but I feel like it's not ideal because Canada is such a multicultural country. So I'm just wondering your thoughts and feelings on that.
Any of the panelists can speak, yeah.
James,
Oh,
should I say a few words? Yeah, okay. Thanks, James, for that question. I think it depends on where in Canada you live, right? I think especially here in Toronto, it's very multicultural, and especially, when you look at the Tibetans living here and working, they're working in various, industries, right? So they kind of blend well with the rest of the community as well. And from my perspective, I don't really think, we're very isolated in terms of, in mixing around with other communities, we do that at a personal level. But from a community perspective, I think, as an organization, I think we've been very isolated in the past. But I think this whole pandemic has allowed us to reach out to the rest of the community. And it was a great opportunity to share, what we have, and at the same time, connect with other communities as well. And as I speak right now, I'm connecting with, we live in a cluster called South Etobicoke. And right now, I'm connecting with a lot of other communities right now, and coming up with programs or looking at their programs. They share their programs with us. So I think it's a great opportunity as an organization, but individually, I think, Tibetans have adjusted, I think, well with the non-Tibetans as well. And if anyone else has any comments.
I would like to say something. James, thank you for the question. It was a wonderful question. For my personal experience, I cannot answer for everyone, but what I felt during this pandemic, before that, I tried to engage with a lot of the non-Tibetan communities. It's really hard to approach. It's like people look at you very differently. But when the pandemic happened and I'm working at the front line, right, and I'm working in the long-term care, then what I noticed is a lot of changes in the families member. They come to see through, like it's a window visit only, but the lot of community, like especially the church, and there's so many other local, they come and they give us, like, even if it's small, they come and give us chocolate and they send us a card. And the small young kids, they have sent us a lot of greeting cards, and they put like a small card in that, like holding hand, because we cannot do it physically, cannot do it. So they send the card holding hands. It was really cute. And I think because of this pandemic, I personally, for me, I become more close to the non-Canadian, non-Tibetan, non-Tibetan Canadians. I become more closed, and then I made a lot of friends. And then the biggest thing I noticed is in the workplace. Before you have your own community, like a Filipino and then Caucasian, everyone, they have their own groups. And during this pandemic, everyone like mingled and everyone come together, and then they talk each other more, and then they discuss more about the mental health and how can we help each other. And then the other thing which I noticed is among our co-workers, they are making more plans, because if we already work together at work, right? If we hang out outside the work, it will be better, because you're not socializing with other people. So like making plans, going for hiking and all that. So I think it was not like a isolation, but it was more like coming together. Thank you, James.
Yes, next we have a question from Karun Kaki. So if you like to speak or ask your question, that would be great. You are still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. This is such a wonderful, panelists talking about these all community engaged, how we build up our community and bring all the community members together. So I really appreciate. And in the meantime, I was also wondering, from our own individual, care providers perspective. So we talk a lot about self-care and then personal wellness, mental wellness, social, economic, financial, and all these well-beings, right? And wellness and well-being, and also work-life balance. And this is how we are involved in the caring profession, and we are caring our community members. But who are the one actually ask us how we are doing, right? So, and I'm just wondering, how are you managing yourself, your own, self-care? So that was my question. So, it's an open question, so anybody can share your experiences.
Maybe I'll go first, I guess, again. Okay, yeah.
I'll go first this time, Tringla,
Okay.
and then
okay.
you can go next.
Okay.
I'm joking, Tringla, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So self-care, what I've actually noticed is, I'm a father of 3 children. I have a wife. And being out in the community and doing all this work, when I come home, I'm in trouble all the time. Because the first thing they ask me to do is they treat me as if I'm, some outsider, every time I go out. and these are days like way back in the early days, right? And they say, oh, you don't care about us. You don't care about, So, but at the same time, we used to take all of the precautions that we needed in terms of, hand hygiene and, masking, which came later on. But at the same time, I kind of felt that, sometimes when you work that hard, when you look at people that work voluntarily, you'll notice that there's a lot of satisfaction that you normally get from the work, and it keeps you going all the time. And I don't know what it is, but it for me, it hasn't really affected my health very much, right? So I know it's important to make sure that you're protecting yourself and then protecting your families as well. But there's something in volunteering and that satisfaction that you get. It just puts you at a different level. I remember back in the days when we invited His Holiness in 2004. We worked day and night for like whole day, whole night, and then again the next day, and then and then even then we were still alive and kicking and really going through everything. So I think to answer your question, basically, when you start doing community work, I think it gives you a lot of strength. I think all along the way, and something that's out there that really protects you. I think and of course, then you have people watching you, like your family, to make sure that you're protected as well and keeping well. Great.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments, then I have next Sarah Schneiderman with a couple of questions.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to ask first if any of the other panelists would like to address those questions that we had already. well, hopefully we can come back to some of those themes too. It was so interesting to listen to all of your presentations. Thanks so much. And I really appreciated Tenzin Tekan's invocation of the diversity in the community, to be very clear that there are so many different experiences and inequalities as well. And I feel like that's really important to recognize. And there's kind of this tension between talking about Tibetan community experiences and talking about the diversity of them. So I'm really glad that you highlighted that. But it strikes me that one of the things that does bring people together is language. And so I wanted to ask a little bit more about the role that language has played in experiences over the last year. Like Tenzin, you showed pictures of like the Facebook Live sessions with Tibetan text as well. And I think a few of you mentioned that one of the things community organizations have been doing is translating COVID-related information into Tibetan. But I was curious to know if any of you have come across official government publications or information in Tibetan, either in BC or Ontario. This has been something that we've been talking about in relation to various other language communities as well, and I think has come up and really been addressed in BC, particularly by Punjabi-speaking communities. Also that, there's sort of this sense that somehow this is work that should be done by communities themselves. And of course, some of that is possible, but also the government may have a role to play in actually developing multilingual communication strategies. So I was just wondering if you've had any interactions with the government over that issue, or seen those kinds of Tibetan language materials, or been asked to work with government to develop them. That was one question. And then the other question came out of Tenzin Tekan's talk, but really is for all of you. You talked a bit about how, in a sense, Tibetans have, many people have faced adversity and have faced all kinds of challenges, from immigration challenges in Canada to experiences of exile and hardship elsewhere in the world. So I was just curious to know how you all think the pandemic experience is similar to and different from the other kinds of challenges that you think are common within the community, and how do people think about that, or how are people talking about that? Is it like, well, we've been through so much, and here's just one more thing, and we'll come together and do all of the many admirable things that all of you have been talking about? Or do you feel that people see a kind of qualitative difference, that this is something distinctive, and is it a kind of a new sort of experience that requires different kinds of coping strategies? So those are the two questions I have. Thank you.
I can go first this time, Wangela, save you the trouble. Thank you, Sarah. Those are great questions. In my limited experience, I've seen in Parkdale, at least, because of the large number of Tibetans, before COVID, there were multiple organizations offering materials in Tibetan. So my place of work, Community Legal Clinic, we had flyers in Tibetan on many topics. I know that PIA, Culture Link, West Neighborhood House, like other social service agencies in the neighborhood also produced these pamphlets. These were all sort of from organizations that served the community in South Parkdale, and there being so many Tibetans, it made sense to have these materials readily available. I think since COVID struck, I haven't really seen a whole lot out there from governments themselves, whether it's the municipal or provincial or federal, in Tibetan. I know that our local MPP, Putila Karpoche's office, has put out some translated videos and newsletters in Tibetan explaining the various government benefits. But one thing that I should note is that while there are Tibetans who don't read English and only read Tibetan, many Tibetans, especially our grandparents, who even though they're fluent orally in Tibetan, they can't read Tibetan, or they don't have access to the technology where most of this material is disseminated. So that's in response to your first question. The second question about sort of similar experiences in the past, I was thinking earlier about like the experience of, disease in the Tibetan exile community. So when, my grandparents left Tibet, my maternal grandma is said to have died from, I think, cholera, or one of the many diseases that Tibetans, died in numbers when they got to India from Tibet, because they weren't exposed to many of these diseases. And then in exile in India, in particular, the occurrence of TB, tuberculosis in the Tibetan community. And here in Canada as well, like many Tibetan migrants who come here to reunite with families, they are on medical surveillance because of past experiences of TB or like latent TB. So I feel like I myself had to actually stay in a facility, a quarantine for 3 months because I contracted TB. So I remember when I was there in that facility, other Tibetans were there as well, and they were like, oh, TB, it's like the Kuda's disease, Kuda, the aristocrat's disease, because like all you do is you just like sit and eat and just relax. You don't really like feel the pain. So I was thinking of that.
Thanks. That's really interesting. I know a lot of our colleagues from First Nations communities have also talked about how this is not unprecedented, actually, this is precedented. And so many different communities have had experience of disease and, like you just said, quarantine before this particular pandemic. So it would be interesting to kind of situate the current experiences in relation to, right, those longer term experiences as well. So thank you for sharing that.
I just wanted to add, Sarah, to what Tenzin Nawang Tekan mentioned about translation of documents. So it's true, we haven't really seen anything from the government, whether it's at the city, province level, nothing at all, anything translated in Tibetan. But we at the center, we did translate, some documents. But now, I'm involved with the vaccination engagement. So I think what the city has done is, they have these clusters all across the GTA in Toronto, and they are having these local communities come together with the CHCs, with the community health centers. And now they're developing, there's some funding that's actually provided so that you develop these documents so that, and of course, they want the adoption rate to be very high so that people take the vaccination. So that's, how all that is, being worked out right now. So it seems, I think there's now slowly they realizing that, they need to do that. So, but Tibetan is last on the list. Normally you see all the other languages, unless we really take initiatives ourselves to translate something and then, make it available out there. Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Yes, I think this concludes our Q&A part. And Tsering, can I ask you to go ahead and Tsering Dalgada?
Yeah. So there's a question from anonymous attendee who writes that Tenzin Tekan, you raise such an important point that is often neglected and stigmatized about the vulnerability of undocumented Tibetan that has been exacerbated by the pandemic in every aspect of life, financially, psychologically, socially. Since you have experience working with them, in your view, what are some of the ways in which we can support them as a community? Do you want to answer that about particular impact with undocumented members in our community?
Sure, I can try. That's a really great question. And I will say that the Tibetan Community Associations has, in Ontario at least, has taken a leadership on this issue as well. And they continue to advocate behind the scenes with, the political party of the day to advance a sort of pathways to permanent residence and permanent status for many in our community who don't have status. I think in general, Tibetans can help by not kind of buying into the state's narrative of deserving and undeserving migrants and refugees. I think that's really problematic and something that I hear, you know, in our community as well. There are movements, there are organizations, great organizations doing amazing work here in Toronto and nationally on the issue of status for all, right? On access to healthcare, access to social services for all, regardless of immigration status. And I think that's something that everyday Tibetans can get behind and support those calls. I think, yeah, that's all I'll say for now. I know we don't have a lot of time.
Thank you, Nala. Actually, just for information, last week, Strong Jala and Chukila from Ontario, Strong Jala was here now, organized a meeting with the two of the Ontario MPs and Chukila, who works at Ottawa, on webinar on undocumented members, not just from Tibet, from the whole Himalaya, you know, Nepali Tibetans. And we had a meeting on that, and Ronjala is leading that discussion and working with, and I attended the meeting also to talk about, you know, how we should deal with these undocumented members from other Himalayan communities in Canada. So this one, now I'm going to invite Sring Togala from UBC Himalaya Program and UBC School of Social Work to give us some concluding remarks and summary of her thoughts on the presentation. Sring Togala, please.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, thank you. The senior you have been puri kaji you have been to kuna samlo just the letter the denyam shu nam that to jena but and okay, and then I'm gonna revert back to English. Hello everyone, my name is Srin and I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Social Work. I'm also still continuing to work in clinical practice, particularly within addictions and mental health context within the Vancouver's downtown east side population. So as you can see, you know, marginalization and being marginalized is the key theme in terms of, you know, my interest in whether it's with populations and research, you know, subject areas. So for today's presentation, I want to say that, you know, a big thank you for the UBC Himalaya Program, first of all, for, you know, extending that invitation over to me. And I'm very glad that, you know, we could have this virtual chat with all of the presenters here. I must say that I'm incredibly, you know, nervous to sort of like round up this whole, you know, plethora of, you know, topics that has been raised in this presentation. And I don't know if my reflexive skills as a social worker is actually going to count much here, but, you know, I will give it my best shot. So one of the things I think, you know, there's a lot to sort of take in terms of what each presenter has to bring here. You know, starting off with Dadoen's talk about the distribution of PPE, and more than that, the underlying theme of taking initiative and being creative about, you know, what are it's almost in a sense a crisis-based sort of intervention that the community has done, you know, in providing these PPE masks and then collaborating later with the larger organization to you know, sort of create very you know, very creative moves forward. And then with you know, Sedonla's talk about, you know, obviously, you know, with Sedonla, she's always very positive about things. And so even through the pandemic, you can see the spirit with which she describes the pandemic and how she's been able to forge those connections forward. And I think that's something that, you know, and you can often see within the discourse of the pandemic and how it's impacted different populations and different peoples differently. You know, while a lot of us are, you know, are seeing the pandemic as sort of barriers towards whatever, you know, the disruption in our day-to-day life, there are also a lot of opportunities that it has presented in terms of being creative about how we foray moves forward, and whether it's our career, whether it's our the community engagements and activities that we're interested and passionate about. And then with Tenzin Nawang, of course, she painted a really vibrant picture of the community and how it all started in around Parkdale. And I'm especially struck by your mentioning of the undocumented migrant piece and the very arbitrary nature sometimes of the refugee, the asylum process that most people don't actually know. I think there's a overarching narrative of Canada as a progressive nation state, and as Tibetans, we surely have benefited a lot in terms of the refugee and the convention refugee protocols that's been set ahead, and Canada being a signatory to that process. But at the same time, there are also it is still a neoliberal system, and if I have to be very critical about that, I would say that those kinds of narratives are not homogenous, as many of us here know and experience, and depending on where you are and what kind of situation you're facing in terms of whether a documentation, what your pre-arrival destination is, and where you're landing, your port of entry, all of these make really significant are very significant factors into your asylum process. And in the case of the undocumented migrants and what we call sometimes, we often also talk about these in the very cavalier terms as like, with no shugu, or like, but I think, the basic understanding here, the question we have to think a lot further is to reflect upon, what exactly is an undocumented migrant, and who is an undocumented migrant, and who determines that, and so I think those kind of issues are, discourses that we as academics, as practitioners, have to sort of look at it and tackle at it through a multi-pronged approach. So, and not just the communities kind of going forward to like sort of lobby with their own political provincial parties or offices, but having a national, I think, Canadian Tibetan associations with people working in Himalayan projects, all of them coming together, practitioners, academics, volunteers, advocates, all coming together to sort of really bring awareness to this issue. So I think and one of the things I would say also is that we talked about the disruption in our day-to-day lives that the pandemic has brought, and overall it sounds like from Sriwangila's perspective, and which is largely a macro sort of lens into how the community has really initiated these kinds of activities that are really amazing to see, because it is at the end of the day, the Tibetan community is a very small fish in a huge multicultural pond of the Canadian society, and so to see how much we have been able to galvanize and advocate for ourselves shows the resilience of refugees and refugee communities. And that, I think, is something that we need to reflect upon in terms of the larger discourse of, the popular discourse of refugees being a dent on the national resources and being sort of charitable cases. At the same time, the whole discourse around refugee populations have always been targeted through a very and reasonably, and this rationale behind it for that, in order to get humanitarian assistance, this overwhelming propensity to talk about refugees in terms of their vulnerability. But the speakers here today have really been much more articulate than me in terms of talking about the different ways in which we have been creative around rallying together during this time. And so what it says to me, listening to these narratives, is that yes, refugees are very vulnerable populations, and of course the pandemic has hit people at the lower socioeconomic margins and different kinds of marginalizations a lot more than someone who is in a higher bracket. And so there are definitely intersectionalities of class and identity issues that we need to consider here. But at the same time, it is also this definitely says, we're not just people who are coming into a host country and settling in and just, sort of feeding off of the resources of the host country. We are very resilient, people. We are survivors who have gone through long periods of statelessness and refuge and exile conditions to emerge into, very self-sustaining communities. But having said that, I also, have this constant dichotomy in terms of my own inner voice about what this means, because often too, if you look at the large resettlement, the project that has been done during the Conservative government's term, if you look at it, we Tibetans are really, grateful for their opportunity to bring in and resettle a huge number of Tibetans. But at the ground level, when the small community is saddled with the responsibility of resettling all of these families, what kind of resources need to be provided? And I think those are larger structural issues that we need to be talking about. And I think those will, over the long term, will require both academic and practitioners sort of focus in terms of how we move forward, the Tibetan community, and not just the Tibetan community, but even, the larger refugee study, populations and area of study. So with that said, I'm conscious of the time. It's like 4:33. And so I'm going to stop rambling here. But once again, thank you. I think this is a great concrete way of, sort of manifesting concrete ways through which we talk about community engagement and linkage to academia. We often talk about that in our funding proposals, and we talk about how we're going to do it. And I think this is great to see that there's actually, ownership taken by the UBC Himalaya program to do this. And thank you again, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Sringla, and thank you for our speakers. And it's a really excellent, all the sort of points that everyone raised. I said the Tibetan community is not singular, it's just heterogeneous. We have different experiences within our community. Nor do I want to privilege Tibetan experience as some kind of unique, not suffered by other communities. Then also, I said this is a pandemic. COVID is not the first experience of hardship within our community. We have gone through many hardship and changes, and we have come through. And this is not just within the Tibetan community. Almost Canada is made of an immigrant community and refugees. My neighbors are Hungarian refugees or Syrian refugees. We all have this experience. And I just wanted to express some way in which with the Tibetan community, when I saw what our women's association with the Ontario, we're not longer just merely a recipients of charity, but we in fact were active in providing resources for the larger community. So thank you very much for joining us for this discussion. And I'll just ask the speaker and our Himalaya program just to remain online a little bit so we can have our own sort of chat. So thank you very much, everyone.